I was thrust into a small world within a book by the system. My mission was to win the villain's heart and redeem him, preventing him from turning to the dark side and disrupting the world order. When the system came back online, it caught me biting the villain's lip. The system was confused, perplexed, and shocked. Looking at the panel, it screamed in disbelief. Bloody hell! How is your yandere level even higher than the villain's? Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Host, my energy levels are critically low. I'm about to enter hibernation mode. Host, your identity is the adopted sister of the secondary male lead, his nominal sister. Please remember to complete the system task. Win the villain's heart and redeem him to prevent him from turning evil and disrupting this world's order. The cold electronic voice gradually faded from my mind. A flash of white light suddenly appeared, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself in an unfamiliar environment. Molly, take good care of the young master at school. My shoulder was suddenly patted firmly. Suppressing my instinct to counterattack, I looked up at the serious-faced bodyguard giving instructions. Adapting quickly to the new environment, I glanced down at my black suit matching his. And obediently replied, "All right. But system, tell me, since when does an adopted sister start off as a bodyguard?" The spacious room was clean and tidy. In the dim light, half of my body was concealed in darkness. On the way to this world, the system had told me this was a world within a book, a novel. My goal was to win the villain's heart and redeem him, preventing him from turning to the dark side and disrupting the world. At this point in time, the villain was being bullied by classmates, while the female lead kept helping him time and again. The sunflower-like female lead burst into his field of vision, warming and healing him who dwelled in darkness. This was also the 0.5 step on his path to becoming an obsessive villain. The sudden click of the door opening broke the silence. I looked up towards the sound and saw a frail-looking boy in a wheelchair, a delicate youth with a sickly pale complexion. He was also my target, Cleve Blackwood. "Young master, Molly is about your age. From today on, she will be protecting you at school," the bodyguard said respectfully. He pushed me forward and sternly instructed. "Molly, take good care of the young master at school. Don't leave his side for a moment." I obediently crouched in front of Cleve, looking up at his seemingly gentle but actually cold and distant eyes. The scent unique to a young man wafted to my nose. I curved my eyes into a smile, took his hand, and placed a reverent kiss on the back of it. Introducing myself, I said, "Young master, my name is Molly Gray. I may be small, but I can take on 5 people at once. I'll stay by your side and never leave you, young master." Ignoring my bold gesture, Cleve's gaze lingered on me imperceptibly for a moment. He nodded with a gentle smile. "All right, thank you for your hard work, Molly. You can accompany me to school as my sister." Hearing this, the smile on my face widened further. "Of course, young master. I suppose this counts as the adopted sister the system mentioned." Standing up, I walked behind him and pushed the wheelchair towards the door. The youth's fair neck suddenly appeared in my line of sight. It looked so delicate that even the slightest pinch could easily leave a mark. Ah, the lines of his neck are truly beautiful. I want to pinch it. I stared at Cleve's neck, lost in thought, unconsciously reaching out my hand towards that fair skin. "Is something wrong, Molly?" Cleve suddenly turned his head to look at me, his puzzled gaze falling on my hand suspended in midair. My fingertips inadvertently brushed past his soft hair. I made a waving motion above his head and said with a faint smile, "There was a small insect flying just now." Cleve made a sound of acknowledgement and turned back around. Lowering my gaze to hide the depths in my eyes, I continued to admire his neck while pushing him forward. Redemption, huh? This feels so difficult. What should I do? Cleve Blackwood had a wealthy father who was biased and couldn't tell right from wrong. A vicious stepmother who had climbed her way up from being a mistress. And an overbearing illegitimate older brother. Encouraged by his brother, many classmates mocked Cleve daily. Upon arrival, my identity was already clear to the class. I obediently followed behind Cleve, unsurprisingly becoming a thorn in their side as well. In just the time it took to get some water, I was cordially invited to the toilet by my enthusiastic classmates. "Are you that cripple's sister?" Come with us for a bit. Not understanding what was happening, I was firmly held by the arms by two girls. As if I were a prisoner being escorted and taken to the toilet. Cripple? They must be talking about Cleve. I didn't resist, compliantly going with them. Cleve doesn't think bringing a lackey will keep him safe, does he? Bruce told us to deal with anyone who hangs around Cleve. I have to say, she's got quite a pretty face. The sharp blade tapped against my face, causing a slight stinging sensation. I looked at the girl in front of me, who made no attempt to hide her malice, and kindly advised. Knives are dangerous, it wouldn't be good if someone got hurt. Hearing my words, the lead girl clutched her stomach and laughed raucously, saying to the other two. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter, did you hear what she said? Knives are dangerous, I'm deliberately here to hurt you, what are you going to do about it? As she spoke, she looked at me maliciously, wanting to see me frightened and begging for mercy. Aren't you afraid I'll tell a teacher or call the police if you do this? Warm blood trickled down my cheek as I asked her with a calm smile and curious expression. As if the person being hurt wasn't me. The lead girl scoffed disdainfully. You've got the guts to try reporting this, see who suffers in the end. I raised an eyebrow. They were being a bit too arrogant and reckless, weren't they? So, is this something you do often? She didn't speak, just haughtily lifted her chin in response. Bruce Blackwood, the Blackwood family. Money and power really do make people willful, don't they? Then again, what use are detailed laws in a novel? With power and influence, all dark loopholes can be erased. How convenient for me. Well, since you put it that way, it seems wrong not to be bullied. I looked up at the lead girl excitedly, the corner of my mouth curling into a strange smile. Before she could understand what I meant, I twisted my own arm to break free from the other two's restraints, quickly reacting to kick them to the ground. The force was so great that they lay on the ground wailing in pain, unable to get up. Under the lead girl's increasingly terrified gaze, I walked towards her with a gentle smile. Taking out a black marker pen from my pocket and toying with it. You like drawing on people's faces, do you? What a coincidence, I like it too. I flashed in front of her, mercilessly kicking her knee and gripping her jaw, forcing her to kneel on one knee and look up at me. I held the black marker pen tightly against her face, grinning sincerely at her. How kind of you, knowing I've never drawn on someone's face before. Ignoring her struggles, I stepped hard on the leg she was kneeling on. Don't move around, or I can't guarantee your other leg won't break. Devil! You're a devil, she screamed, dragging her leg. To ensure the quality of my artwork, I grabbed her hair and yanked her towards the corner, stuffing her mouth with a dirty rag. I carefully drew a turtle on her face, stroke by stroke. As for the other two lying on the ground, I decided to gift them with a drawing each as well. All done, now I need to go find Cleve. I locked them in the furthest cubicle before leaving. When they'd be discovered was no longer my concern. After all, they were the ones who chose such a secluded toilet in the first place. I found Cleve's wheelchair outside the noisy bathroom. What a coincidence, Cleve had also been invited into the bathroom. Hearing the arrogant voices from inside, I pretended to sigh and squeezed into the crowd of students gathered around. Oh, my poor, frail young master. Cleve Blackwood, you think you're worthy of competing with our Bruce? Take a look at yourself in the mirror. Come on, you lot, hold him down and let him see what a pathetic state the Blackwood heir is in now. Receiving a look from Bruce, the ringleader got even more fired up. Look at you now, you're like a dead dog. What makes you think you can compare to Bruce? If I were a useless cripple like you, I'd jump off a building out of shame rather than disgrace the family name. Cleve leaned against the wall, soaked from head to toe, his clean white shirt now filthy. His fringe covered his eyes as he hung his head, making it impossible to see his expression. That's enough, Andy. He's still my brother after all, the young Blackwood heir. Bruce emerged from the corner and walked up to Cleve, putting on a show of false concern. Cleve, you should know I never intended to compete with you for anything. After all, we're half-brothers. He slowly ground his expensive leather shoe into Cleve's right hand while maintaining a facade of concern. Father often talks about you at home. You should come back to visit sometime. Excruciating pain radiated from Cleve's fingertips, as if being stabbed by countless needles. His face instantly turned pale and broke out in a cold sweat, though a mocking smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Go home? To that den of wolves? He remained silent, allowing Bruce to continue stepping on his hand. It wasn't just his right hand that had been crippled. Seeing no reaction from Cleve, Bruce clicked his tongue impatiently, and was about to teach him another lesson when a figure burst in unexpectedly. Bruce Blackwood. You're bullying people again. That bold, protective stance. That clear, ringing challenge. Oh ho, the female lead has arrived in a blaze of glory. The female lead, Jenny Webb, childhood sweetheart of Bruce Blackwood. I forgot to mention, the male lead in this book is Bruce, the illegitimate son who stole the nest. Are you all right? I apologize on Bruce's behalf. A delicate hand appeared in front of Cleve. He ignored the person before him and looked towards the crowd gathered at the door. Just a bunch of rubberneckers. He turned his gaze back to Jenny, his voice icy cold and making no attempt to hide his disgust. How revolting. What did you say? Jenny's smile froze on her face. For a split second, a flash of amazement crossed her eyes as she took in Cleve's appearance. She smiled apologetically, then turned to stand in front of Cleve, hands on hips as she glared angrily at Bruce. Bruce! You promised me you wouldn't bully the weak anymore. If I catch you bullying anyone again, I swear I'll never speak to you. She grabbed Bruce's arm and forcefully dragged him out, not forgetting to turn back and say to Cleve, I'll be right back with some clean clothes for you. I stood silently in the crowd for a moment, suddenly at a loss for words. Was this really Cleve's first encounter with the sunflower-like female lead? It seemed a bit dim-witted. How on earth did she manage to become the light in Cleve's heart later on? Is she even worthy? I looked at Bruce being pulled along by Jenny, listening to her lecture with fond exasperation. However, his sinister gaze fell more dangerously on Cleve. My poor young master, it seems he was just a prop in their love play all along. As Bruce and the others left, the crowd of onlookers dispersed as well. I wheeled the chair in. Ignoring Cleve's current disheveled state, I lifted him from the floor into the wheelchair, teasing playfully. Young master, are you putting on some kind of wet shirt seduction act? The damp clothes clung to Cleve's body, outlining his lean physique with hints of abdominal muscles showing through. His wet short hair fell across his forehead as I gazed at his exquisitely sculpted face, my eyes lingering on the small mole below his lips. That tiny beauty mark added a touch of allure to his cool demeanor. Young master, promise to include me next time you put on a show. I suddenly leaned in close, our noses almost touching. And stop trying to seduce me. He looked up at me, his deep, probing gaze meeting my devout one. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, as enticing and dangerous as a poppy. Molly, you really are interesting. I blinked, the corners of my mouth turning up in pleasure. My gaze shifted to that small mole below his lips, now animated by his smile. I want to kiss it so badly. Young master, if Molly does even more interesting things, will you reward me? Cleve encountered Bruce again in the basement of his grandfather's house. He had just returned home from an outing and hadn't even had a chance to rest. When I blindfolded him and mysteriously led him to a place. Young master, I have a gift for you, I said. Cleve only felt a whirlwind journey, twisting and turning, until finally he and his wheelchair were pushed down a steep staircase. His fingers tapped restlessly on his leg as he couldn't help but ask, Molly, are we there yet? I hummed a little tune and replied cheerfully, we're almost there, young master. Young master, we've arrived. As the blindfold was removed, the scene before him instantly fell into Cleve's eyes. The lights illuminated the vast, cold basement, and the items arranged inside along with the unique designs on the walls made Cleve understand where this was. This was his grandfather's basement, a place usually used for interrogating traitors. Molly, is your gift here? He raised an eyebrow, gesturing for me to explain. I smiled without answering and pushed him towards one side behind the wall. Young master, let's go to the other side. As soon as we entered the room inside, Cleve saw familiar faces hanging diagonally on the wall, with terror being the last expression frozen on their faces. The person occupying the center was bent over exaggeratedly, Hands hugging their feet curled into a ball, head turned 90 degrees facing the direction of the door, fate unknown. From a distance, they looked like a bloody painting etched onto the wall. Cleve glanced at the person in the middle, without any surprise. That person, is it Bruce Blackwood? Yes, it took me a bit of effort to get them like this. Young master, you don't know how soft Bruce's bones were. They shattered with just a slight tap of my hammer. What I did to him isn't even a tenth as bad as what he did to you, young master. But he started begging for mercy so early. It wasn't any fun at all. But I left him with a breath of life, just waiting for you to come and appreciate. I said with a grin, crouching down and resting my head on his leg, looking up at him expectantly with bright eyes. Young master, do you like the gift I prepared for you? I like it. Cleve lowered his gaze to look at me, a hint of a smile rippling between his brows, light dancing in his eyes. He reached out and ruffled my hair. Thank you, Molly. At that moment, I felt like I heard something explode into bloom in my mind. Young master, may I ask if Molly gets any reward this time? My gaze involuntarily fell on the small mole under his lip. Without waiting for his answer, I suddenly kissed it. In his suddenly enlarged, startled pupils, I kissed him lightly, like a dragonfly skimming water. Barely touching before pulling away. Young master, your lips are so soft, so nice to kiss. I bit down hard one last time, reluctantly leaving our contact. As he was still in a daze, I caressed the corner of his lips longingly, with dark, unclear emotions churning in the depths of my eyes. I want to kiss him again. What should I do? The heavy iron door creaked open with a loud clang. As the harsh light flooded in, Bruce squinted, his eyes struggling to adjust. He had lost track of how many days he'd been trapped in this dark, underground room. Barely clinging to life, he painfully lifted his head to look at the newcomer. His eyes widened in disbelief. His normally hoarse voice took on a shrill edge from the shock. Cleve? How are you standing? Your legs weren't crippled after all? Cleve glanced down at his legs and let out a soft sigh. Oh, they most certainly were. Your mother made quite sure of that when she ran me over. Bruce glared at him venomously, sneering, it's just a pity you didn't die in that car crash. Cleve raised his eyes to look at Bruce hanging on the wall. His voice dripped with mock regret as he smirked, yes, and what a shame you didn't die at Molly's hands. At the mention of Molly, Bruce's face contorted with hatred. He looked like he wanted to tear Cleve apart with his bare hands. You've trained yourself quite the loyal dog, haven't you, Cleve? Cleve shrugged, not denying it. Molly was still too merciful. As he spoke, he unhooked Bruce from the wall and let him fall to the ground. He slowly ground his foot into Bruce's hand, crushing each finger methodically. When he felt the bones give way beneath his foot, Cleve moved onto Bruce's already shattered spine, grinding down as if giving a brutal massage. He poured salt water over Bruce's open wounds, rubbing it in with his foot. Does it hurt? Cleve asked lightly, his tone unreadable. Fresh blood blossomed across Bruce's filthy body like gruesome flowers. He lay on the ground like a broken rag doll, in too much agony to even scream. He could only gasp for air between ragged breaths, glaring at Cleve with pure hatred. If you've got the guts, just kill me. Otherwise, I swear I'll kill you. Is that so? Too bad you'll never get the chance. Cleve's dark eyes were as cold and fathomless as a frozen lake. Don't worry, you'll have company soon enough. The sharp blade glinted in the light as it arced through the air. Bruce's hateful expression froze, his dimming eyes reflecting Cleve's retreating figure. As the sun began to set, Molly crouched restlessly by the door, eagerly watching for Cleve's return. Young master! When the familiar silhouette appeared, Molly ran over joyfully and naturally took hold of the wheelchair. The subtle, elegant scent that always clung to Cleve made Molly's smile widen. Bending down, Molly whispered in his ear, Young master, I've prepared another surprise for you. At the mention of a surprise, Cleve couldn't help but recall Molly's previous request for a reward. The tips of his ears turned pink. Noticing his subtle reaction, Molly couldn't resist nibbling his earlobe. Seeing his ears flush bright red, Molly's grin grew even wider. He was just too adorable. The late summer evening breeze carried a hint of coolness as I pushed Cleve's wheelchair into the garden. 1, 2, 3. I counted softly to 10. As my voice faded, I made a gesture behind me, and all the lights in the garden went out in unison. Bang! A sharp, deafening sound suddenly rang out in the darkness. Golden fireworks shot straight into the sky, illuminating half the night and Cleve's exquisite profile. More fireworks continued to rise, exploding into various shapes and patterns, blooming with dazzling brilliance. I leaned down to Cleve's ear and whispered, "Happy birthday." Cleve suddenly looked up, his amber eyes swirling with obscurity and inquiry. But he saw only his own reflection in my smiling eyes. "It's not my birthday today," he said, his voice low and husky. I winked at him. "I know, but I just wanted to say it." The fireworks had ended at some point, and the garden lights came on again. "Let's go. I've prepared another gift for you." I pushed Cleve to the underground car park. Seeing the woman on the ground, bound and disheveled, Cleve raised an eyebrow at me. "Hazel Baker?" "That's right. I told her Bruce was in my hands. And if she wanted me to spare her son, she should come and exchange herself." I lifted my chin slightly, giving him a smug smile, my eyes glinting with mischievous malice. "I just didn't expect her to dare show up alone," I said, kicking Hazel's shin lightly and looking at her as if she were an idiot. Cleve didn't speak, just glanced at me fleetingly. That one look seemed to see right through me. All right, the old woman actually brought 7 bodyguards, but I'd fed them to the dogs like dog food. However, I wasn't about to tell him this trivial detail. Before the system went dormant, it had sent me all the plot points. Hazel Baker, this vicious woman, was the one who had interfered in Cleve's parents' relationship, directly causing his mother's death and leading to his legs being crippled. But the real culprit was still behind her. "How do you want to deal with her?" I turned to Cleve with a smile. "Shall we cripple her too?" He pondered for a moment, then, under Hazel's half-angry, half-fearful gaze, curved his lips into a faint smile. "Whatever makes you happy." "Fine," I shrugged, suddenly feeling a bit bored. Compared to my simple and brutal methods, I was more interested in seeing his approach. "I don't want to perform violence in front of the young master." "It's all your fault," I grumbled dissatisfiedly, venting by stomping hard on her chest. Hazel didn't have time to roll away. There was a cracking sound, followed by intense pain that contorted her face as she writhed and struggled. Her ribs seemed to have been forcibly broken. Meeting her bloodshot eyes full of hatred, I sneered disdainfully. "This is nothing, and you can't even handle it." I ground my foot into her chest, and Hazel felt as if the broken ribs were piercing her organs. Her gagged mouth could only whimper weakly and hatefully. Deciding it was enough, I removed my foot, coldly observing her twisted face that had gone pale with pain. "Via room! Via room! Via room!" The roar of an engine broke the silence of the underground car park, and blinding white light shone on Hazel. She instinctively tried to get up and flee desperately, but could only watch helplessly as I rode over her legs. MMPH. The sound of bones breaking seemed to echo. I dismounted nimbly and looked at her with disinterest, then turned to Cleve, tilting my head. "Young master, she's fainted." We'll wait for her to wake up then." My patience wasn't as good as Cleve's. He said to wait, but I wouldn't. Who knew when Hazel would finally wake up? I called someone to bring a bucket of chilly water and mercilessly poured it on her. The fiery pain forced Hazel to wake up in agony. "Awake now?" I crouched in front of her, removing the rag stuffed in her mouth. She didn't care about her current situation at all, just looked up at me with hatred in her eyes. Her voice was very hoarse and rough. "Let Bruce go." I raised an eyebrow. "You really do love that son of yours." She didn't deny my words. "But I have no intention of letting any of you go." "What shall we do?" Constructing several ways to torture people in my mind that would make them wish for death. I fixed my cold gaze on her and said quietly, "Those who harmed the young master should all die." "Molly." A gentle voice pulled me back to reality. I instinctively put on a smile and turned to look at Cleve. "What is it, young master?" "Let them go." Under my disapproving gaze, Cleve gave me a slight smile. He looked kindly at Hazel, the corners of his mouth curling up. "If you can take him away, I'll let you go." I glanced at Hazel, whose legs were already crippled, thought of Bruce, who was already dead. Then looked at Cleve, who was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, he only appeared gentle and harmless on the surface. I curled my lips slightly, liking him even more. He gestured for someone to throw Bruce, like a dead dog, in front of her. The moment Hazel saw Bruce covered in blood, she broke down and started screaming, crawling towards him despite the pain. "My son! Cleve, you bastard! How dare you do this to him? I should have killed you directly. Bruce! My Bruce! He's your own brother." She shouted these words hoarsely. I clearly felt the air around Cleve turn cold, his beautiful eyes clouding with endless frost. Does an illegitimate child born to a mistress deserve that title? I pulled Hazel's hair, not hiding my sarcasm. Gripping her chin tightly, my eyes cold. "If you can't speak properly, you can choose to keep your mouth shut." A flash of cold light, blood splattered on my hand, and a lump of red fell to the ground. I threw Hazel to the ground like trash, smiling maliciously. Now it's quiet. Not caring about her fate anymore, I happily ran to Cleve, taking out a stack of documents from my bag like presenting a treasure. "Tada! Young master, look what this is." Cleve took it, not knowing what to expect. When he saw it was a share transfer agreement, his hand holding the document trembled slightly. The transferor was Hazel, and he was the transferee. "Young master, do you like this gift?" I suddenly leaned close to him, asking softly. He looked up at me steadily, his indifferent eyes now reflecting only me, sparkling with points of light. I smiled gently, letting him examine me, presenting myself openly under his scrutinizing gaze. Suddenly, Cleve smiled at me, his shoulders shaking slightly. As if long-suppressed emotions suddenly erupted, laughter spilling from his chest. It was joy from the bottom of his heart. "I like this gift. Molly, thank you." He wiped away the tears of laughter, his lips curling into a dazzling smile as he embraced me. He said, "Molly, it's so good that you came into my life." I saw his subtle change and gave him a sincere, big smile in return. A faint buzzing sound passed by my ear as I gently kissed the corner of his eye. "Me too, young master." I knew all the directions the plot could take. But I didn't understand what redemption meant. I only knew that when I first saw Cleve, I felt a strange possessiveness towards him. If Cleve's fate was destined to darken and become a villain, then I would accompany him, even surpass him. As for the collapse of the world, what did that have to do with me? I would only walk into the darkness with him. With Hazel and Bruce's combined 20% stake, Cleve successfully jumped ahead and became one of the shareholders in his scumbag father Victor Blackwood's company. It must be said that Victor truly cared for that mother and son duo. It was undoubtedly true love. However, this love was built upon the bones of Cleve's mother. After dealing with those two, Victor was next. When I kidnapped Hazel, I considered whether to use extreme measures. To force him to hand over the company to Cleve, and then torture him slowly. But after careful thought, I decided against it. Cleve would personally step on his head and make him fall from his high position into the mud. Besides, I didn't want to upset him. I stood quietly behind Cleve, listening to Victor's furious voice coming through the phone. "Cleve Blackwood, who allowed you to approve the bidding today? Don't think that just because you have 20% of the shares, you can act all high and mighty in front of me. If you want to challenge your old man, you'd better see if I agree first." He hung up the phone cursing. I wrapped my arms around Cleve's neck from behind and said with a grin, "It seems your bold move has made him anxious, young master." "That's good. However, he's not the only one who's disgusting." I looked up towards the window, my tone filled with icy mockery. "Annoying pests can be dealt with as you please," Cleve replied softly, turning his head to nuzzle my cheek. I agreed with a simple okay. Little did I know, before I could make my move, I would be the one caught off guard at home. Cleve was busy building his empire, so he rarely went to school anymore. But I still had to go. After all, Bruce wasn't the only one who had bullied him before. I thought I should go and sort things out, and establish some authority while I was at it. After I had set things straight, I realized that Jenny Webb, the female lead, hadn't been coming to school. She couldn't have gone to find Cleve, could she? I returned home with a grim expression. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Cleve with an extremely low, gloomy aura surrounding him. And, well, Jenny lying on the ground, half dead and disheveled. She really did have the audacity to come after him. How disgusting and outrageous. I walked in front of him, bent down to take his hand, and naturally placed a kiss on the back of it. Young master, I'm back. Ever since that night I dealt with Hazel, Cleve's attitude and feelings towards me had clearly changed. Just like now. Cleve, who had been looking gloomy just moments ago, immediately put on a pitiful expression when he saw me. Molly, this disgusting woman just tried to seduce me and even attempted to take advantage of me. Then how about I feed her to the dogs? I kissed his cheek and noticed Jenny, who was pretending to be dead, trembling in fear. Without any hesitation, I called for someone to drag her away. But as soon as they touched her, she immediately sat up. Stop! I'm Cleve's fiancé. Who dares to touch me? Jenny glared at me, her eyes filled with obvious hostility. And you, what are you? How dare you try to steal Cleve from me? Don't you know who I am? I wrapped my arms around Cleve's neck, leaning on him to assert my claim. She sneered with disdain and jealousy, nothing but a mere pet. Her words were truly offensive. Perhaps I should cut out her tongue? I tilted my head and looked at her, my gaze sinister. Weren't you Bruce's fiancé? How did you become my young master's? I, Jenny Webb, would never be with a disgraced nobody. She raised her proud head haughtily, looking at me with contempt. As if she couldn't understand why I would ask such a stupid question. So, she was just after Cleve for her own benefit? I found it somewhat amusing. Is this really the female lead in a redemption story? She's nothing but a fraudster driven by self-interest, wrapped in a halo of false righteousness. I suddenly lost interest and muttered to myself. As long as the female lead is still barely alive, this world won't be considered broken. After pondering for a moment, I looked up at Cleve. Young master, let's keep her barely alive. As for whether the world would truly collapse, I think someone will give me the answer. Jenny was taken away by the bodyguards. As for Victor, with Cleve's current abilities, he could ruin him at any time. The story is nearing its end. I sat on Cleve's lap, closing my eyes and resting quietly against him. He seemed to sense the subtle change in my mood and asked softly as he held my waist. Are you unhappy, Molly? I'm not unhappy, I shook my head. I just feel a bit bored. Then what would make Molly not bored? Cleve lowered his head until our noses were touching, his gaze so tender and affectionate it could drown me. On a sudden impulse, I blurted out, Cleve, can I kiss you? He raised an eyebrow without speaking. Only a fleeting look of surprise in his eyes before they grew even more gentle. The soft sensation was like an electric current through my body. Under his tender advances, I bit his lip. It felt like I was venting, like I was anxious. Cleve was surprised by my aggression. But he held me gently, allowing me to kiss and bite as I pleased. Warning! Warning! The world is about to collapse. A cold electronic voice suddenly rang out in my mind, followed by the weak and exasperated voice of the system. Damn it, host! What have you done to trigger the main system's warning and wake me up? This is the last chance to save this world. But why is there still a very faint energy constantly flowing in? Hearing the long-absent and confused voice, I paused in my kiss with Cleve. It seems the decision to leave the female lead barely alive was correct. I calmly communicated with the system in my mind, checked the world collapse value. The system obediently looked at the fluctuating collapse value, and when it saw the final number, it cried out in shock. This. 99%? How is this possible? What exactly did you do, host? I calmly replied, I just let the female lead die a natural death with her last breath. The world hasn't collapsed and you're still getting energy, aren't you? The system was at a loss for words. You do have a point. So what are you doing now? The system asked me curiously. Suddenly feeling a sharp pain on my lips, I opened my eyes and glared at Cleve. What are you thinking about, Molly? Cleve bit my lip, displeased. I'm thinking that I want to be with you for a very, very long time. I bit him back in return and replied to the system, kissing the villain. Huh? What? The system was confused and bewildered. When did you get involved with him? You just need to make sure the world doesn't collapse, don't ask about anything else. So the system silently shut its mouth and observed the world collapse value again. Seeing it had completely stabilized, it suddenly had the idea to look at the host's panel. Damn it! Host, how is your yandere value higher than the villain's? A piercing electronic sound suddenly screamed, loud enough to burst my eardrums. Even though the system's voice had no inflection, I could feel its shock. I forgot to tell you, this mission to save the small world is considered successful, right? I leaned against Cleve's chest, twirling his hair around my finger as I continued speaking to the system. If it's successful, you can go back on your own. I'm staying here. Is it because of Cleve? I looked up at Cleve, whom I had my eye on from the very beginning, and interlaced our fingers. The corners of my mouth turned up slightly. After a moment of silence, the system said, Host, are you really sure about this? This world is only 1% away from collapse. Yes, I'm sure. As if thinking of something, I suddenly joked with the system. Since you're so worried about the world collapsing, why don't you stay here with me to observe it? You can quickly escape a second before it collapses. Hearing this, the system's light body shook violently in fear. Are you kidding? The next collapse is the next system's problem. I'm leaving now. Goodbye, host. The system, well aware of my mischievous nature, hurriedly unbonded from me and ran away. Feeling the system truly disappear, I felt a sense of relief, a flash of cunning in my eyes. What a foolish system, revealing such important information even as it was about to leave. Since systems exist in this world, it means the world can be traversed. World collapse? Non-existent. I believe that with Cleves and my abilities, we will be able to track down the systems that come here in the future. Cleve, I want to be with you for a very, very long time. I want to be with you, always. Cleve's side story. On the third time I couldn't resist fate, I awakened. I realized the world I was in was a novel. And I was destined to be the obsessive villain who loved but could not be loved in return, heading towards a dark path. But would I really fall in love with Jenny Webb? Utterly ridiculous. For the plot that had already been written and the ending that was destined to be unchangeable. What I hated more was that I wasn't myself. I could only be manipulated by the storyline. After learning this, in countless times of starting over, I chose to take even more insane revenge on the world. It was also at this time that I suddenly discovered the players with systems. The damage I had caused to this world was irreparable. So they could only try to conquer and redeem me in the remaining time, attempting to save this shattered world. Unfortunately, I had long grown tired of the redemption act they were putting on. I fed all the so-called players to my beloved dog. Until Molly's appearance. The moment I saw Molly, I knew she was a player. More importantly, I saw the intense interest she showed in me in her eyes. I saw the obsession and madness under her calm gaze. I thought, she and I were probably the same kind of person. The burning gaze behind me that I couldn't ignore made me turn my head to look at Molly. At the moment I saw her reaching out to me, I had no doubt that she might snap my neck the next second. This player seemed even crazier than me. Fortunately, she only waved her hand in the air, and didn't choose to directly break my neck and restart this world. I looked amusedly at the figure blocking me. Indeed, no matter how many times I started over, I always despised Jenny Webb. Every time she stood in front of me, it only brought more rage from Bruce towards me. She couldn't really think I was stupid enough not to notice her little tricks, could she? Utterly laughable. But Molly, weren't you here to win my heart and redeem me? Why are you standing among the crowd? It's confirmed, Molly is mad. I never expected that she would directly imprison Bruce in the basement. Hanging on the walls were all the people who had severely abused me. According to the previous timeline, Bruce would still be high and mighty, while I would have to endure him for 7 years like a lowly dog. But now, our positions were reversed. Bruce met an earlier, more miserable death. Though Molly seemed more merciful than me? The moment Molly suddenly kissed me, I was surprised for a while. Among the previous players, there were those who tried to seduce me, hoping to get into my bed. But Molly. I looked up at the interest flashing in her eyes and the surging dark obsession. I thought, perhaps I could try the honey trap and get the system from her. Then kill it. When I heard Molly say happy birthday, I didn't understand the meaning behind her words. Until I saw Hazel Baker and saw the share transfer agreement handed to me. Happy birthday, young master. It was a celebration of the beginning of my rebirth through revenge. And this beginning was Molly's gift to me. I stared at her intently, properly examining her for the first time. And she smiled openly and sincerely, different from her usual smile. Her bright eyes made no attempt to hide her emotions, showing her mad and obsessive love for me. It's truly unbelievable. I suddenly had the crazy idea that a madman and a madwoman could fall in love. Although it's a bit absurd, but... Thank you for coming to my side, Molly. I effortlessly took over Victor's company. As for him, my biological father, the feeling of falling from a high place into the abyss must be quite good for him. And Molly and I got together. It was no longer a honey trap, but me genuinely loving her. Even if she might eventually choose to take my life because of the system. But I never expected Molly would tell me her identity as a player. How wonderful. The decision to keep Jenny Webb barely alive was correct. The world's destruction value stopped at 99%, but this wasn't permanent. In the third year of Molly conquering me, Blackwood Corporation gradually expanded and secured its position as one of the top 5 economic powers in the country. Now, it was also a good time for us to do research. The Loving System Bureau wouldn't give up on any world, so Molly and I put on an act later. Sure enough, a new system came. But the target was no longer me, it was Molly. The system was harder to crack than we imagined, but where there's a will, there's a way. In the 15th year of meeting Molly, we succeeded. As the system collapsed at the end, Molly and I were already on our way to a new world. By then, Molly and I had also successfully become wanted by the system. However, those systems coming to the new world to capture us would only become our stepping stones to the next world. Until Molly and I find the world where the main system exists, seeking immortality. After all, Molly and I had promised each other we would always be together.